we have been publishing impact reports now for 10 years. This is our latest one. We're very proud of our reporting. We've won a lot of awards for it, and we do think that it really sets the standard of what impact managers, and perhaps all managers, should be disclosing in terms of their exposure to sustainability. We cover a whole range of different aspects of our performance. We focus in particular, of course, on impact, but we do also cover the ESG profile of the strategy and provide more and more reporting actually on stewardship and engagement as well. And we like to think that it's pretty candid as well, that you see both the positives and also some of the areas that we need to improve on. So I would encourage you to take a look at the report. It's obviously available from our website. But I will just go through some of the headlines and some of the key things, some of the key messages as well. One of the things that we've spent quite a bit of time on in the report is preparing for the requirements of the sustainability disclosure, the SDR regime, sustainability disclosure requirements. It's been quite a process for us going through that process with the FCA, and in fact we are still going through it. One of the things that they have, I think, helpfully done for us is to provide some constructive challenge on the clarity and the specificity of our sustainability objective. In the past, we've talked about our strategy being focused on investing in companies that provide solutions to sustainability challenges. The FCA have encouraged us to be more specific about what that means. And in the draft prospectus that we're currently discussing with them, we do talk about these two areas in particular, so supporting a stable climate and healthy ecosystems and enabling more productive and healthy lives. And actually the prospectus is even a lot more detailed than that. But hopefully that's giving a little bit more clarity about what it is that we're trying to achieve with the strategy. And then the other thing that is worth emphasizing as well, which is something that we introduced a few years ago with our white paper on impact investing, is this point about our impact being composed of these two elements. There's the impact that's associated with the companies that we invest in, the assets that we invest in, and the impact that they deliver. And then separately, there's the impact that we can have ourselves through our engagement and stewardship activities. And really our reporting is structured around those two elements. The other bit that is very prominent in the SDR, particularly for the sustainability impact label, is this need to disclose and describe the theory of change that you have that governs your approach. In the past, we've done a lot of work at the level of each individual investment that we make and understanding the theory of change that exists there. So how does the particular product or service that the company sells, how does that actually deliver impact in the real world? But the FCA are keen to see this described at the level of the strategy as a whole. And this chart is intended to capture that. It's in the impact report as well. I won't go through all the details, but at a high level, essentially what we're trying to do here is describe the theory of change, which ends up with those outcomes or the objectives that we've set for the strategy as a whole on the right-hand side. And essentially what we do, going through from left to right, is we've identified a set of problems, social and environmental problems that we're seeking to try and help solve. We've identified then parts of the market that provide solutions to those problems and categorized those into our investment themes. We then have different tools that we've developed to analyze those potential opportunities, both from the perspective of the impact that they deliver, the overall quality of the operations of the company, including the ESG quality, and then also, of course, areas like valuation and portfolio construction. Our levers of change are then obviously investing in the company, most obviously, the stewardship and engagement that we do both with the companies themselves and also with the system, so that's with policymakers and standard setters. We obviously have the opportunity to divest as well as a lever of change. And then we talk about signaling as well. How we report and disclose this activity as a way of trying to influence the rest of the market. And then ultimately, this ends up with these indicators that we measure in terms of the impact of the investments that we make in terms of the assets themselves, and then also our activity in terms of stewardship engagement and trying to identify outcomes that we can link with our engagement. So that's the overall theory of change that we've described in the report, and I'm also putting forward to the FCA for SDR. I want to spend the rest of my time now just talking about performance and what we can see in terms of some of the data that we're reporting. So most obviously, this is on the impact that we're delivering through the investments that we make. This has been a big part of our reporting and also of our impact calculator that's available on our website. Strictly speaking, this isn't our impact. This is the impact that's associated with the companies that we invest in. And we've provided 2 years of data. We have actually been collecting data, as many of you will know, for many years, 7 years now of impact data that we've collected. But for the last 2 years, we've been using data from a third party, and so which is really a reasonable basis on which to compare performance for those 2 years, rather than going back 7 years, which would include data that we collected ourselves. And this data does come with a caveat. It's only 2 years, and the data is bouncing around a bit still, so it's not mature. Nonetheless, you can see some trends, and in this case, with these 3 core environmental impact indicators, you can see an improvement year on year. The y-axis does vary across the different metrics, so sometimes it's rather more modest than it appears, but nonetheless an improvement in each case. Avoided emissions, that's the impact of businesses in our resource efficiency theme in particular, where they're, for example, selling technologies that allow manufacturers to be more efficient in their use of energy. It would include also businesses in our sustainable transport theme that are supporting battery electric vehicles, and you see a reduction in emissions with a battery electric vehicle compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle. So that's what that is measuring. Renewable energy is really just about renewable energy, solar and wind power in particular, and the amount of renewable energy that's generated associated with our level of investment in those companies. Waste recycled is principally plastic waste being recycled into stormwater systems, and recycled cardboard as well is a big focus area for us. So you can see how that's all improved year on year. Another theme for us is water management. We actually measure 2 aspects of water management. One is around wastewater, and the other is around water saved. So that's efficiency technologies focused on water, particularly in manufacturing. And this is measured in megalitres, which is millions of litres. And all of this, by the way, is per £1 million invested in the strategy. So it's normalized around £1 million. The wastewater numbers have bounced around quite significantly, and that's an example of this maturing that I talked about. The reasons for this more than trebling of positive impact in our wastewater indicator is because of an acquisition that one of our companies made in 2022 that boosted their exposure to wastewater treatment. And then another business which called Veralto, which had previously been part of another company that we own called Danaher, T mentioned. It was spun out last year and now is reporting its own data separately, which it hadn't done before. So that's better quality data that's really driving that change rather than necessarily an underlying change. So yeah, some caution in terms of the data. And then finally on the social side, a bit more mixed performance here. Healthier lives and well-being comes from companies, for example, that make safety technologies, helping keep people safe. We also include this year vaccines in this category. So vaccines used obviously to keep people healthy, prevent them from contracting disease. Previously, that's been in the healthcare category, and we've moved it into well-being. And that explains some of the changes between those two different categories. The decline in health in terms of number of people treated is also partly because of COVID, where we still saw some numbers of people being treated with diagnostic kits, for example, in 2022, and that really tailed off completely in 2023. And then finally, in education, that's really the decline in performance in that indicator is really due to the sale of one of our holdings in the education theme in 2022. So I hope that gives you some sense of really, I think, a good message really in terms of improved performance in many of these indicators, and we'll obviously keep reporting this year on year going forward. We also cover a lot of ESG data, so this is more about the operations of the companies that we invest in rather than the impact of their products and services. And here too, the story is being pretty good. We've taken an example of gender diversity. The data goes back 7 years in this case, so much more solid data set. And this is measuring the proportion of women in senior management and board level positions at companies. And you can see that this has improved quite significantly over that 7-year period, from 17% of boards and senior management teams being made up of women in 2017, and that's increased to 27% in 2023. So a significant increase over what is still a relatively short period of time. We are behind the benchmark on this measure. That's really due to the fact that we tend to invest in sectors and industries that have historically had poor gender diversity, and not in parts of the economy like media and entertainment, which tend to have quite high levels of gender diversity. But you can see that over that period, actually our companies are diversifying in terms of gender more quickly than the market. And obviously that's really good news, and we're very proud to have been a small part in supporting that change. On the carbon side as well, I'll just give you two more. On the carbon side, we measure performance here in two ways. We measure the proportion of the emissions coming from the portfolio that are covered by net zero carbon commitments. And you can see here in the chart in the middle that in 2019, that was essentially zero. I think we had one company actually that had a net zero carbon commitment. And you can see how quickly that has changed over the years. That's the rate of change has slowed down in the last couple of years, but we now have 82% of the emissions from our portfolio are now covered by net zero carbon commitments. That was up from 80% last year. Our target is to have 85% of the portfolio covered by net zero carbon targets in 2025, and then the full portfolio 100% covered by 2028. That's that dotted line. And then on the right-hand side, this is the actual performance in terms of actual emissions. And you can see there a few things to call out. That grey line measures our financed emissions. So these are a measure of the scope 1 and 2 emissions that we own through our holdings in these different businesses. And you can see that fell very dramatically in 2021. That was due to the sale of a company called China Everbright Environment Group, which is a waste to energy operator in China. We sold that partly for concerns about their strategy on climate change. And that has meant that our financed emissions are 89% below where they were in 2019. So well ahead of our target, which is for an 18% reduction. The other number that's important is that darker line, and that measures the emissions that are associated with companies that were in the portfolio in 2019 and remain in the portfolio today. You won't get that data point from almost any other asset managers. So we are extremely transparent about this. And that number has fell in line with our targets through 2020 and 2021. Sadly, that was mostly due to COVID, and that has now bounced back to roughly where it was in 2019. It has the rate of increase has slowed down in the last year. Obviously, we don't have that many data points. And our hope and expectation really is that the commitments that the companies have made will increasingly flatten that curve, and then we'll see a decline in the years ahead. But that's trying to measure the ongoing emissions of companies that are held in the portfolio across that period, whereas the financed emissions takes into account buys and sells as well. And then finally, before we open the floor to questions, we spend a lot of time on our stewardship and engagement work, and of course disclose all the data around the activities of our engagement, so the letters that we write, the meetings that we vote at, all those activity metrics. But we think it's really important to try and focus also on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve with our engagement. The point of engagement isn't just to do engagement, it's to deliver an outcome. And so what we're trying to show here for our work on greenhouse gas emissions is the changes that we're seeing in terms of outcomes and aligning that with the work that we're doing on engagement. So this chart shows you absolute emissions on the y-axis, which is a logarithmic scale, And then on the x-axis, it's showing you the degree to which the company's strategy is aligned with the Paris Agreement, from not committed to aligned. And the two data points are from last year to this year. And you can see that there has been some very modest changes around emissions, sometimes increases, sometimes decreases, and more substantial changes in terms of strategy. Now, we don't claim that these changes are solely due to us. That would be ridiculous. But we do believe that we're making a contribution here. We are asking for these things from these companies, and they are increasingly delivering them. And as I say, we think we're making a contribution to that change. This is one way of trying to focus attention, not just on the activity of engagement, but also what it's delivering in the real world. And you can expect more of this kind of reporting from us in the future. So I hope that's been helpful, and I think we have time for a few questions, so I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you.